Is this working? Yeah, good. I just want to say to start with, it's kind of cold. And if you really want to go by the fire, that's okay. You don't have to be watching. And I really hate for anybody's toes to get too cold or your fingers. If you need to stand up and shake your shoulders, that's okay too. I don't know that I can really do this all in this headpiece, but I thought one of the things I love to do is after we've made things is to put them back together, and it creates new concepts and new ideas and new ways of looking at what you did before. And so I thought it was kind of appropriate that I should do something like that today. I hope you enjoyed the Sentinel gargoyles earlier. We spelled Sentinel with a C because they were created in honor of the Art Museum's 100th anniversary. And our Sentinel gargoyles have now transformed into frogs. And I mean, when you think about the evolution of things, gargoyles probably become frogs, and we all need more frogs in our life. So it's good that they came, and I thank them very much for getting up early. They're part of the Community Arts amazing team of performers and creators that bring everything that you see throughout the year to Cleveland. It comes from these guys. So not just this four, but there's a whole bunch more. Anyway, I have some notes. I don't know if I can hold notes and talk, but I think I know what I'm talking about. First, I should introduce myself. My name's Robin VanLear. I am the director of the Department of Community Arts at the Art Museum. We started that department in 1991, 2, or 3, something like that, when Robert Bergman came to the museum as our new director at the time. And he was so excited about what was happening with Parade the Circle that we decided that it should be a department. And in spite of a lot of adversity, it lives today, and it's going strong. So I'm happy that that's still happening. So when Tom mentioned to me about the idea of Beyond, the first thing he said he thought of was all the artists that came from other parts of the world to Cleveland. And I think that's really an important part of what community arts does. But I wanted to start by talking about excuse me, how I kind of approach art, like what my focus is. And it's been the way I've approached art kind of since I was little. First of all, I consider myself an artist. That's kind of a brazen thing to consider yourself. But I think everybody, Tom was talking about the manifesto. You know, it's a funny word, manifesto, but the manifesto for CreativeMornings and the idea that everybody is creative. And that's also at the core of community arts and the core of everything that we do in our purpose in the museum. So to me, when I was thinking about Beyond, what I started with actually were sort of 3 or 4 places that I feel like it's necessary to go beyond. The first is tradition. And I am one of the most traditional people in the world. I love traditions. I love rituals. I think that's what helps us get through life. But we have to go beyond that tradition. I'm going to talk about that in a second. The second is place. We have to go beyond the place where we are, the place where we're comfortable, the place where we normally operate. And then we have to go beyond ourselves. We have to go beyond the way it's comfortable for us to work, the way that we feel confident. The song this morning was just all about like making that risk and the courage to come here and say, you know, I didn't really write a Beyond song, but I have all these things that are beyond, and I'm putting them together and presenting them. And I wish I had that talent. I mean, that was really amazing. And one of the things that was most interesting to me was to be able to watch him actually create the song in front of us. And that's really at the heart of what community arts does. So backing up just a tiny bit, I'm not very good as a linear talker, so I hope you can follow through me. I feel like ideas aren't linear, really. Our life isn't really linear. If any of you have read Kurt Vonnegut, I really subscribe to his theory of the fact that all times and all places, I think, exist at one point in time. And I'm more of a talker. I mean, we all have to talk from ourselves. It sounds egocentric. It sounds like something that is not what we're supposed to do. You're always supposed to be getting everything from someplace else. Well, we do get everything from someplace else, but you have to know sort of what you feel and what you're passionate about to begin with. And if you don't, then spend some time doing that. So I was asked to come to the museum a long time ago now, in 1989. I was really young then. I was asked to come and help the museum celebrate its 75th anniversary. And at the time, I wasn't interested in a museum job. I never actually had been interested in a museum job. I love museums, but I don't think museums are typically very good to artists. And that was one of my problems. I think museums are great once artists are dead. And I think museums are great once artists are famous. But museums have a hard time traditionally in dealing with us here, those people that are working, that are trying to express themselves, that are trying to make art in the today, and maybe aren't interested in being famous, and maybe even, surprisingly, aren't interested in making money. And that doesn't put you on the road to becoming blue chip, unless maybe you die early and then you become blue chip. So museums, it's really hard for them. They just don't understand messiness. And so that was a hard decision, whether to change my focus and whether to come to a museum. The thing that sold me in Cleveland was, first of all, my parents were living here. I was living in Santa Barbara, California. My parents were living here, and I had been to the museum a lot, and I thought it was a really beautiful museum. I thought Cleveland was an amazingly beautiful city. I happen to love architecture. I happen to love just houses, like the way people make their houses look, you know, how they build their house, how they renovate their house, how they decorate their house, the stuff they put in their yard. I was taking a walk the other day, and what I noticed, I walked by this house with a lot of plastic Easter eggs and inflatable bunnies, and I thought, I never would put that in my yard. But I was so glad that I had neighbors that did, because just imagine you lived in a neighborhood where everybody did the same thing in their yard. You would never come up with any great ideas. I really believe that. Anyway, I'm going out now. So the museum really wanted something to happen to for their 75th anniversary. I had met a group of people from the museum in California. I happened to have in my pocket some snapshots of a project I had done for an event I was directing in Santa Barbara called the Summer Solstice Celebration. And it was a great event. It is sort of a great event still. But the thing that the board was never really interested in was getting the part of the community that couldn't afford the cost of coming to the workshops that they would hold to make this event happen, or maybe didn't even know about these workshops. They weren't really interested in figuring out how to get that part of the community involved. So when they started talking to me in Cleveland about bringing this type of an idea to Cleveland, I said right off, well, I would be interested in doing it on one stipulation. The idea of working with the entire community of Cleveland has to be at the core of the event. It can't just be the suburban museum membership that comes and makes this event happen. And it has to be about involving the art community of Cleveland. It has to be about partnering artists and people who don't think of themselves as artists working together. I think one of the problems that, and I'll say we as artists have, is that we don't embrace the community any more than the community embraces us. And it's a two-way street. You can't think of yourself as better. You can't think of yourself as having better ideas, more clever ideas. You can't think of yourself as being more creative than anybody else. But you have a skill, and that you have to be really proud of, and you have to present that skill with all the professionalism that you can. You have to present that skill with all the depth of knowledge that you have gained, whether you're 15 years old or whether you're 55 years old, or maybe you live to be 95 and you're really lucky. But you always have to present that and not be afraid that it's part of who you are and what you believe in. At the Art Museum in Cleveland, they have an expression called Cleveland quality, which means that you only collect the very best examples of work from the various periods or styles in art. And in community arts, I think Cleveland quality is at the heart of what we do, because we don't work with community members to make something. We work with community members to make the very best art that each individual involved in the project is capable of. Now, best has a lot of parameters. I mean, best could be most technically proficient. It could be most innovative. It could be just wacky. It could be, sometimes it'll be beautifully crafted, and other times the paper mache is barely holding on to the cardboard. And a lot of it is a function of time. Almost always it's a function of time, let's be honest. Money, yeah, but you can get around the money thing. Really, it's the time and being willing to commit your time. And for me, that's something I've never been afraid to do. And I think when we're talking about going beyond, that's one of the key areas that you can't, an art teacher once said, if you're asking me if this project is good enough, clearly it's not. If you're presenting something, you're saying, I wonder if this is good enough. Well, then if you're questioning it, it probably isn't. And so when we're working with the community, one of the things we're trying to do is every artist working with every group has to find that sort of, that hook, that thing that makes you want to go as far as you can go, and an understanding of what everybody is capable of. If you're working with a group of 5-year-olds, you're not going to be looking for the technical proficiency, but that doesn't mean that you don't want them to commit in thought and in deed into what they're doing. When I talk about going beyond place, that means that for the museum, the workshops that we would hold for Parade the Circle or anything that we do can't always be located at the museum. When we started going around and talking to different schools and different groups, what we found was that a lot of the parents were really concerned, especially when we would be on the west side of Cleveland, across the Cuyahoga, which is sort of the grand frontier. We would find that a lot of parents were really afraid of bringing their kids to the art museum. Because the museum was in University Circle. They didn't know the place. They thought of it as a dangerous neighborhood, and they didn't really want to let their kids go there. When, on the other hand, we do a lot of work with high school and college interns, and we had a lot of parents of some of our interns. A father once from Beechwood that said, I'm sorry, I am not going to let my daughter go further west than the art museum. So, you know, she's welcome to be an intern, and she can be at any of your outreach sites on the east side. But I'm a father, and I have to take care of my daughter. This is as much of a quote as I can tell you, and I can't risk, you know, sending her beyond the art museum. That's the area I'm comfortable to send her. And we took her, and she did all of her outreach sites, more or less, on the east side. But that didn't mean we figured out she could go to East Cleveland, and she could go to Huff, and so, but everybody was happy in the end. And then we talk about going beyond tradition, and the art museum and its need for things that are neat. I will tell you, the very first year of Parade the Circle, it was a pretty small band of us. There were 10 artists involved, and we had we didn't have a tent. If you come to Parade now ahead of time, you'll see this. Now we have actually a really nice tent. But at that point, we were working in the classrooms of the art museum, but people wanted to make things that were big. And so that meant we moved into the hallways. The only thing is, in the basement of the art museum, the hallways merged into a gallery at that point. And so we were making a very large beehive in one of the galleries, and we were making large puppets in the lunchroom, and pretty soon there was paper mache and everything everywhere. And because nobody knew what they were getting into from the hierarchy of the museum, and because Evan Turner, if any of you remember him as the director of the museum, who was a very traditional man, a very basically probably conservative man, but just a really gentle soul, just thought, yeah, whatever you need to do, do it. We actually spent the night, a few nights, in the art museum, something that would be hard to get away with now. As much as we've grown and been embraced and we're sort of part of the fabric of things, when people don't know what you're about to do, you get away with a lot more than once they do know. So the next year we did get a tent, and we weren't allowed to mache in the lower galleries anymore. So Tom said one of his bits of advice to me was make sure to include some anecdotes. So I'm seeing on my note here, anecdotes. But I do want to, early on in the parade, though, in fact, very early on, at the end of the first year, Cox Cable, are they around anymore? Does Cox Cable exist anymore? Cox Cable has an outreach program, and they helped us for about 5 or 6 years create the video of Parade the Circle. And so after the first year, we had a showing at the museum for the education department to see the parade video. And one of the women who worked in the education department, one of our art historians, looked at me once the video was over, and she said, "Wow, I can't believe you pulled it off." Now, I want to tell you, we only had 125 people in the first parade. And we had a little more than that came, but not too many. And she said, "I can't believe you pulled it off." She said, and this was somebody who I really thought of as one of my strong supporters. And she said, "Because all this time I've just been waiting to watch you fall on your face." So that's where we started from. We have, progressed a long way since then. We've gotten into some controversies. The parade has some pretty hardcore guidelines. You don't think of community arts things having hardcore guidelines, but we have some pretty hardcore ones. One of the first ones is we don't allow any written words. And that seems harsh, but the reason we don't is because then I don't have to decide what is an advertisement and what isn't. I don't have to decide what's commercial and what isn't. I don't have to decide sort of what's acceptable and what isn't. On the other hand, you can recite poetry, sing songs. You can express your verbal ideas verbally, but just not in images. We don't allow any motorized vehicles. We do allow motorized wheelchairs, but we don't allow, or assist devices, scooters, but we don't allow any motorized vehicles. If you've ever been in a parade and they had motorized vehicles, you know that it's not much fun. Maybe it is if you're in the motorized vehicle, but I've always been walking or dancing or something, and it's not much fun, and the two motorized vehicles and people don't coexist very well together. So we don't have motorized vehicles. We don't have live animals unless they're working animals. And if you've ever been in a parade with horses, you know why that is. So we don't allow any political or religious propaganda. Now, that said, I wanted to tell you a story about one of my favorite pieces that's ever been in parade. So I'm going to back up again a minute. My mom, who unfortunately isn't here today because she isn't physically here anymore, but she's here somewhere. She She was a very staunch supporter and came to everything I ever did up until about a year before she died. And she would come to parade every year. And she was also very verbal and very vocal about what she liked or didn't like every year. And she didn't like things that were sad very much. And she also didn't like things she considered crude. One year, one of our artists, a very long-time artist with Parade, created a bunch of giant whoopee cushions. And my mom told me afterwards that for a family event, she thought that whoopee cushions were inappropriate. Well, a few years later, a group from the Cleveland Peace Action Coalition came to me and wanted to be in Parade. And they said, we really want to do something for Parade. We're having a really hard time figuring out. We don't want to break your rules. So for 2 years, we worked on what they might do that would be true to what they believed in. Because what we always ask everybody to do for Parade is just express yourself. You know, express what's important to you. So we came up, so I worked with them personally really hard. They came and took our workshops. They went through our training workshops. They went off and created their piece. I went and saw it a couple times as it was being created. I was very excited for it. When they came out of the gate, shall we say, at the start of Parade, I literally started to cry. It was one of the most amazing pieces I've ever seen. So I have to describe it to you. It started with puppets that are created in what I refer to as the German puppet tradition. It means that the puppets typically are not too tall, sort of somewhere up in there. The faces of the figures are sculpted, but not the backs. If you know Bread and Puppet, Peter Schumann comes from the German tradition of large pageant puppetry. And so typically, because there's no back to the heads, they have a long sort of cape or shawl type of piece that comes down from the head. And then they were wearing dresses. The faces on these puppets, there were probably a dozen of them, represented women of all various ethnicities, all with like a tear, all slightly set, very stylized, very strong, very beautiful. And every one of these puppets was carrying a figure. You couldn't tell if the figures were children or adults. Some of them did appear to be wearing camouflage. Some of them were just in dresses or just wrapped. And these women came down the street and presented the figures that they were carrying to the people watching on the side of the road. They were followed by a group of individuals in suits, dark suits, with white plastic masks, carrying briefcases, and these individuals would walk right through the women, sort of through the middle of these women, approaching everybody on the side. And as they started to come through, the women turned to the men with, or maybe they were men, you couldn't tell, androgynous individuals in white masks and suits and briefcases, who were walking through. And these men were followed by drummers, just drumming a cadence that just continued along the way. And the men would ignore them. They moved through the women. The women gathered together, came from behind and followed the men, sort of moved through the men and off to the side to show the audience what they were carrying. And this continued throughout the parade. So almost immediately after the parade happened, my boss, who was one of the parade deputy directors, came to me and said, "What were you thinking?" And I said, "About what?" And she said, the piece with the women in the figures. And I said, "Oh, I know, wasn't that amazing?" And she said, "You're in a lot of trouble, basically. One of the other deputy directors wants you fired. She's worried that we are going to lose all our donors that are on the conservative side." And she said, "And I thought you said there would be nothing political in the parade." And I said, "This wasn't political." And she said, "Well, clearly it was." And I said, "How could this have been political?" She said, "She believes you are representing the Bush administration, so this puts you in time and place." And I said, "Why? What about the Bush administration?" well, you had all those men in suits with suits and briefcases. That's clearly the Republicans. Like, okay, all right. And so I tried to explain her also about another German tradition in performance where you put on white plastic masks or white masks and represent to represent an androgynous part of society. And that didn't get me very far. And she said, yes, I was watching it. I was watching it with the director, our CEO for finance, and our CEO for development, and they're both really upset. So the next day, I saw the CEO of development, and I said, I'm really sorry that you were upset about that. I said, but, it was not a political statement. It was clearly a very strong social statement, but we don't have anything that says nothing social, no social statements in the parade. And I said, I sort of looked at it as being, the World Bank or the World Food Organization, and I thought it was actually about Nestle, I have to confess. But in any case, this woman looked at me and she said, I never said anything. She goes, oh, I'm not upset. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was a very strong piece. I love everything you do. Just keep doing it. Now we have to go back to my mom. So that night I said to my mom, I told her what had happened, and she said, oh, yeah, I didn't think that should be in the parade either. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, it was so sad. It made me cry. She said, I was just, I was really, really saddened by it. And she said, I don't know if you should make kids that sad. And I said, oh, so you think it shouldn't have been in the parade either? She goes, oh, I didn't say that. She said, of course it should be in the parade. I'm just telling you how it affected me. I'm just telling you what it made me feel. But of course it should be in the parade. If you made the parade only what I like, what about all the people that like other things? So that's my mom. And that's where we were in the museum. And for 3 years after that, I had to sign something that I was going to vet everything that was in the parade and make sure it didn't break any rules. But, it didn't, so. One of the things I wanted to I want to go beyond parade, because parade's just like not a tiny bit of what I do. It's a lot of what I do. But one of the points of community art is not just to be parade at the museum, but to bring things that people don't expect to other parts of Cleveland and other parts of our lives. Because to me, the most powerful way art can affect you is when you're not expecting it to affect you. And so I have one other little anecdote I wanted to present, and then I think we're really cold and we should probably let you guys jump up and down or something. But a number of years ago, as part of our search for artists in other parts of the world who are doing things similar to what we do, I went to Mexico with actually my husband and my daughter were there, and a couple of other artists at the time. I don't even remember. We were on our way to an area of Mexico City called Xochimilco, which is, if you've been to Mexico City, it's where they have the this flower. It's all these canals. It's one of the parts of Mexico City that sort of is like Mexico City was originally, when it was an island and it was canals, sort of like Venice is. And they have all these boats they call the flower boats, and they go up and down these canals, and it's for tourists, and people go, and people in other boats sell you food, and people in other boats sell you dolls, and well, we didn't realize how long it was going to take us to get by the numerous buses and subways that we had to take to get to this part of Mexico City. It's a pretty large city. And so by the time we arrived, it was actually starting to get a little duskish, and we weren't even sure that the boats would still be running. However, they were. And I do want to say that if you ever do go to Xochimilco, I think I really recommend going at the end of the day when everybody else has left, because there was just like a couple of boats still like cruising down the canals, and nobody much was around, and it was really very lovely. But the best part was that on the way there, we had to walk through these back streets, and there were no signs, and we're sort of finding our way through the little alleyways of this town, and all of a sudden, we hear this noise, and the noise probably sounds a little bit like this might sound. There was just this sort of like, can I make it make noise? I can hear it a lot inside here. I don't know that you guys can hear it. And so we hear this noise, and we can't figure out what this noise is coming from. And all of a sudden, we turn around, at least this is the way I remember it. We're going down a street. We turn around, and we had just passed an intersection. And all of a sudden, from behind, so can we imagine this together? We're like going this way, and we're going that way. We turn around. Here's this cross street. And out from behind the building come this group of men, maybe a half dozen of them. They're all dressed in very sort of fancy outfits. They have things on them that make noise, like bells and stuff. They're wearing these screen masks. They kind of go up like this above their heads. And nobody is around. Nobody is around but the three of us. And they're walking down the street like this. And then they go out of sight. On the way, after we finished our canal ride and we're walking back, we found out it was a saint's holiday. And there had been, earlier in the day, something going on, like a festival. And it was sort of packing up and cleaning up as we were going back to find the subway again. But several things blew me away. First of all, we had no idea. We're looking for these flower boats. And all of a sudden, we're treated to this most amazing performance. I mean, the costumes were beautiful, but even more than the costumes, to me, it was the dedication of these men to their character, to who they are and what they were and their role and how they presented themselves. And so when we talk about Cleveland quality, one of the things that community arts tries to do is bring unexpected art, or art to unexpected art to unexpected places, to get people to realize that art goes beyond a gallery, a painting, a sculpture, a pedestal, that art is so many things and can be done in so many ways. And if we just take the time to appreciate each other's talents, I mean, we are amazing. And if we're going to get through this time that we're in right now, this is the time to go beyond, and support each other and support art and realize that always do the very best you can do. Expect it of everybody else and respect the talents of everybody else. And I think I've talked long enough, and you're probably all frozen, and I really apologize. I brought some things. I don't talk about moving out of your comfort zone. I don't really ever like to have people look at things a lot of times when it's in process. But I brought some things. Some of these, I won't tell you which, are in process for the opening of this year's Parade the Circle. The theme this year is collage. Collage being a concrete poem in this sense, which is collage, a composition of often disparate elements, collected and altered to complete a vision. That's what I think Parade is all about. And I hope you come. It's June 10th. There are some flyers on the food table. There's some flyers about our workshops if you want to come. If you want to be part of them, we'd love to have you. If you want to come and volunteer, we'd love that too. There's a save the date card. There's also a little mini catalog with a couple of essays in it that was, the catalog was made for the 25th year of Parade the Circle. This is 28 right now, this year. And one of the essays, one I wrote, but the other one is written by the woman who worked with me for about 25 of these 28 years, Nan Eisenberg, and she has a really thoughtful essay in there, and I think you would enjoy reading it. And if you want to come up and see any of the sort of things, most of this was made by me and some of the other artists, Story, Robin in the back. Also, thank my team. Can you please clap for them? And thank you very much for coming and doing this on a cold morning. And if you want an outdoor event and you don't want it to rain, invite Community Arts to come with their puppets and it won't rain.